Hello and welcome to On Point, hosted by Sutherland Institute. I'm Holly on the Hill. Actually, my real name is Holly Richardson.
I forget that.
I write Holly on the Hill, yes, and I'm joined with Michelle Mumford, who is an assistant dean at the BYU Law School, and Karen Peterson, who is on the City Council of Clinton, Utah, which needs to be changed to Reagan, Utah. I'm kidding. And then there's Heather Groom, who's on our state school board. And we have a very exciting show today. We're talking about Count My Vote and Senator Bramble's proposal that just passed out of committee this morning. And we're also going to talk education issues. But first, it's Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Enjoy your time with your family, your loved ones, etc.
My husband gave me sausage.
That's awesome.
He knows me well.
That's awesome. We're having pink mashed potatoes for dinner because my husband and I we're not going out to dinner on Valentine's Day. We'll feed the kids at home. So,
Great.
so thanks, ladies, for joining us. We're at the third week, the end of the third week of the legislative session, so almost halfway through. Everybody's looking forward to, I think, a 3-day weekend coming up. And things have really started to pick up. So that first week went slowly, second week started to pick up. This week has been just kind of a killer for the legislators on the Hill. But one of the big issues that we had this week was Senator Bramble this morning presented his alternative to Count My Vote in the Senate committee. And it passed unanimously there. He had a number of people speak in favor of it from both parties, actually. And I know that you're, Michelle, totally on top of the Count My Vote issue because of your role with the Republican Party in the state. And I'd love to talk about the alternatives and what we're looking at.
Right. I think the Senator Bramble's bill is a effort at bringing sides together to about a very important issue of increasing participation, and everybody agrees that that's what we want the caucus system, and that's what we've been seeing over in the historical. In 2010, numbers were up record high. Last year in 2012, numbers went up even further, over 100,000, and obviously, we want that to even go higher. And so the party has done a lot to prepare for caucus night this year, and
it's more than just the Republican Party. I mean, the Democratic Party as well has their caucuses, and there are other,
and they support the caucus system as well.
They do.
They do. And so it was interesting this morning as Senator Bramble, presented his bill, and then there were pros and cons. There were a few cons, but most of the cons were even against CMV. It wasn't like, no, we want CMV. It was, we don't want any of it. Why? And so those kind of voices are coming out saying, well, it's kind of like you're letting CMV win already because you're, this codifies CMV, but it gives the parties another choice, and the opponents are saying why, they're not going to get the signatures. They're not going to get the signatures in the rural counties, or they're not, they're. So why are we going that far? That's really where the opposition is coming from, other than this letter from CMV.
And what I thought was interesting is I was in that committee room, and you're right, there were only a couple people who spoke in opposition. None of them favored CMV. Actually, I do not know why Count My Vote was not there, but they didn't. They did not have anybody there to speak to the bill, speak against the bill.
Right.
But the concerns were regarding specific aspects of the bill, and the one that seems to cause the most heartburn is having an extended voting period for delegates, to have it open over a couple of days.
The 2 days.
Yeah.
And that seems more logistical?
Yes. And I think that's something, too, that they can work on as the bill moves its way through.
Right.
But overall, it's all looking at how do we increase voter participation, right? We do want more voters to participate. And you just ran in a municipal election.
Right.
And I don't know what it was like in your area, but in my area, it's nonpartisan, right? So you would think participation would be high. There's no restraint, and it is just abysmally low.
Yeah, I think in my primary, the 7 to 8% of 7 to 8% voter turnout in the primary. In the general, we had a mayoral race.
Yeah.
So I think that we had a lot higher, closer to 20. But that's still incredibly depressing when you've knocked a lot of doors and tried to really get your people out. So
Senator Bramble's whole point was, the initiative is poorly drafted.
Yeah.
It's poorly written. If it is enacted and goes into effect, the consequences of that are far and unknown because it is so poorly drafted. So he's trying to fix that. And it just makes sense. And CMV's response after the fact is, you know, how dare they intentionally interfere with the citizen initiative? These are our legislators.
Yeah.
That's their job
It is.
to legislate for the people. They've heard their, you know, they've heard voices. This is the concerns, and so they're bringing forward options for parties to have. One of the major concerns is that a party has a right to decide its own, a constitutional right to decide its own nominees. And that somehow has been, you know, forgotten and lost. And so, you know, it's important to make sure, and Senator Bramble is, you know, has that in his mind as well and going forward. And
So do you think too, though, I mean, when we saw the ethics initiative a couple of years ago, it definitely prompted some ethics changes. I think this is putting pressure on the legislature to make some changes, and I think that that's healthy.
well, it is, and the petition itself put pressures. That's, you know, the
Right.
party, in at least the Republican Party, put forth same-day balloting so that you, for the mothers at home or the first responders or out of, you know, if they're out of the
They work
country,
swing shift or whatever it is.
they can still participate. We enacted those reforms. We made it more online friendly. You know, so we've enacted reforms in response to the initiative, and the legislature is just making sure that you know that we go forward even more. You know, they sell their, you know, you see them in the movie theaters, and they're getting their signatures by saying it's going to increase participation. No, it's not. There's no basis that it's going to increase participation in a primary. And they say that women aren't involved. Women are more involved in the caucus system than anything. They already vote in the primary at 54%.
Yeah.
So if you take out the caucus system, what you'll have is women voting at the same rate, still no women running, and no women involved at the caucus level. No precinct leader, no county chair, you know, none of this.
Well, I certainly hope we're going to have candidates no matter what the system is.
Right.
Right? Female
but
candidates.
this
And we need
isn't
more of
quality
those.
producing that.
Quality female candidates, right? It's, I mean, this is not a gender thing, but
Right.
Senator Henderson spoke to this as well, and she was chairing the committee as Senator Bramble presented his bill. But one of the things she said was that Count My Vote says that will increase female participation if we don't have the caucus system. And she says, I beg to differ. I do not feel like I would have the same opportunity if I had to go out and compete strictly on a primary level where we have to do a lot more mail and a lot less personal contact. And she said it was my ability to sit and talk with people that really helped me win my race, right? I mean, and so she really feels passionately about that issue as well.
One thing that I would say too, even right now, is just that women, wherever you are, you need to think as running for delegates, because right now in the upcoming caucus, I think I have seen studies, and so to be fair and see one of the other points on this, you know, I agree. Some of the arguments I think aren't exactly aligning up, but I am frustrated with how many women run for delegate positions. I think there should be more women. That last year or a year and a half ago, the delegates. I just talked to a pollster recently, and I think he said it was about 17% of the state delegates were women. Now, that's not reflective of who does show up to vote. So in a general primary, you actually have over 50% of women that are showing up to vote. But I also don't think it's a fair conclusion to say if you sign our initiative, then it's because of the caucus that there's a low participation. And so I wouldn't say that. But I do think that women, a lot of times, I'm not sure if they have that confidence and they feel strongly enough about running to be a delegate. And so they may show up to caucus. You have a lot of women that show up to caucus. But I would really encourage the women to run. And really, it's not difficult.
It's just your neighbors.
It's just your neighbors. And you know what you do? You call them up and you say, come to caucus and vote for me. I'm going to be running, and I want to represent this neighborhood well. And that's the way the system is designed to be. And so I think some of the women, though, we sometimes can be our own problem, because sometimes we are a little bit shy to do that. And so I think, you know, we've got to do that. And with caucuses coming up, I'd like to see a kind of more attention being brought for that. And even from our party, I'd like to see the Republican Party and Democrat parties even just go forward and say, hey, women, not just show up at caucus, come to caucus, but also consider running as a delegate.
We were actually going to put that in the rules, in the, not the rules, but kind of the script of precinct chairs, what they say at the beginning, encourage
Yeah,
women
and
to
you
run.
know, and to be fair,
Yeah.
that's a concern of mine as well. Is that we have such a low percentage of women who are delegates within the Republican Party. That's a big concern of mine, and I do see in my area plenty of women who come to caucus night, and some of them do run and don't win, but mostly they don't run, and that is an issue. We want women to be able to step up and run, and we know statistically, not just do they show up at a slightly higher percentage than the men in the primary and the general as well, but they make the electoral decisions for the family, right? A lot of times it is the women of the family who are saying, I've done the research, I've looked at the candidates, this is who I'm voting for, you're voting for them too, right, honey?
Right,
Exactly. And and that's that really is sometimes how it happens, right?
Although when it happens the other way, it's
then it's not good. That's not. I know. No. That's
so we don't want to encourage that.
I'm just
Everybody
saying.
make your own choices.
Right.
Everybody make your own choices. But like in my household, so I'm very unusual, and I realize that. But this cycle, we have 8 voters. We have 8 voters in our house.
Right.
So so my husband and I, and then we have 6 kids who will be of voting age, who are still living with us. Imagine that. But it'll be the first time that they will have an opportunity to participate in the system. And I do have daughters, and they're a little bit worried about showing up. And they're a little bit worried about how the process is going to be. Is it going to be very unfriendly to a teenager, for example? Is it going to be really aggressive? So it's showing up, and it's understanding that the process is not meant to be one of acrimony and distaste and
Well, and oftentimes
beating people
the
up.
teenagers that have run, I always find it's interesting because a lot of times they actually do win.
They do.
Or the younger generation, because people are
do.
so excited to see young people and being involved that they're like, hey, I'll vote for you.
That's right.
If you're going to run, you know what? I'd
My
love
son
to
was
have you.
18 the last cycle, and he was voted in as a county delegate, and he's in a wheelchair, and he was very thoughtful and very considered, and listened to all the candidates. He really did a good job. In fact, when I said, hey, I think you should vote for so and so, he's like, I'll make up my own mind, thanks.
Awesome. This release also says it kind of attacks our legislators. It says legislators perpetuate themselves by defining rules favorable to their own elections, and kind of says that they're biased in this analysis, and therefore, 2 things I take issue with that. First of all, they said at first that legislators had reached out to them and said, oh, you have to run this, please, we secretly support you. That was their first claim, that all these legislators support them in secret. Okay, so what happened to that?
Yeah, I guess that wasn't really
And
accurate.
second, in our system, an incumbent does better in going direct to a primary.
That's right.
Not in the
They have the
caucus
name
system.
recognition.
They
That's
do.
right.
They have the name recognition.
Well,
So-
here's one of the points, right? Election law right now is set up in the code. The
Right.
code was put in place by legislators. I mean, that's kind of how it works. So yes, parties have the right to determine how their nominees get on the ballot, but this is also the state has a right, especially when we
Especially when
fund
they're
the
paying.
primaries, where
Yeah.
the state pays for it.
Yes.
That means taxpayers pay for this. And so I totally agree that legislators have the right to discuss election law and to determine
Absolutely.
how to best construct this. And look, if this bill, I mean, if Senator Bramble's bill goes forward and passes all the way through, I think they admit right in this press release that it's going to be very, very difficult for Count My Vote to pass. But this bill also has the ability to say, look, if we don't do it, then CMV is probably going to end up being the default.
Right.
Right.
Well, and this SB 54 codifies Count
Right.
My Vote. So
Yes,
if
it
the parties
does.
choose not to up their game
Yes.
and help better with participation, then they win.
Then that becomes
And they get what they wanted originally.
that becomes the way we're doing it. So let's shift to education. And Karen, you've been really involved with education for a long time.
Yeah.
You've been blogging about the legislature actually longer than I have. I just
Yeah.
passed my 5th year anniversary. Woo! But you were blogging before I started blogging. So
Yeah,
tell
for a while.
me about how you got interested in covering the legislature and all of that.
So I started my days as an intern at the
Oh, wow.
legislature. So that was in 2001, so a little while ago. For Lorraine Pace, who's been gone a while, but if you know her, she was
I do.
fabulous
Yeah,
and
I
a woman
remember
of
her.
force.
Yep.
She was wonderful to work for. So I graduated from college after that. We moved to Seattle for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Then when we returned in 2007, I just started reading bills for fun because that's the kind of person I am. And I read a bill and I thought, if my friends knew that this was coming, they would be mad. They would make noise. And so I told my friends, I'm just going to start writing this little thing, and you can decide if you want to act. And it was kind of when blogs were emerging, and so I thought, well, it will be easier than to email them all and just place it in one place, and they can go look. And so you throw something out there, and it's one of those things where you think, my 5 friends are going to read it, and then within, days, you've got hundreds of hits, and you think, oh, okay, I think that there's, a need for this. So yeah, it's been a really great experience as far as just mobilizing my friends, and then, as the audience has become wider, it's been a good thing, to...
So education policy has kind of been your passion, has it not? Or is it really focused more on all issues that affect kids?
I think I started wider, but then, there's hundreds of education bills every session, and so it feels very, you feel spread thin, and you feel like, an inch deep on things 1 mile wide, and so sometimes it feels better to focus in on one area, and so I've kind of narrowed in the last little while on a lot of education issues, and then tried to find other people to write on, some of the family life kind of issues. So, yeah.
So you're now on the city council.
Yes.
Right? What is is there overlap? Do you see overlap between your new role as a city councilwoman and what you're doing to keep people informed with the state legislature?
I definitely think the same skill set applies as far as communicating and getting word out. It's interesting when the paths do collide. Cunningham, for example, has a bill this session on zoning that has to do with where charter schools can go in and not. So it's interesting to see the kind of worlds collide as far as, my issues with zoning in my own city, and then also, advocating for schools. And so it'll be interesting to see where, because then we've got groups I usually support opposing and supporting same types of bills. So
well, that actually lets us talk just really briefly about the art of relationships, I think, in politics. Right. There is always going to be an opportunity to work together with somebody that you oppose on one or more issues.
Definitely.
And the ability, I think, to work together is just a critical skill for people who are involved in politics. That's too often, and I think there's less of that now.
Caucuses.
But really, I mean, the ability to get along with people, I think, is a really key skill. And there are some people who don't think that they need that skill to be involved. It's like, hey, look at me, I've got this issue, and you need to agree with me.
Right.
But that burns bridges. And I started in 2001, actually, pushing a midwife bill. Highly controversial, right? And we had to learn really early on that we could not burn any bridges, because if we didn't get their vote this year, we wanted it the next year or the next year or the next year, because it took us 5 years to pass the bill. So that was something I learned early on, and really value those relationships. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Someone said to me early on when I started going up to the legislature, you have to find something you like about every legislator. Sometimes you have to look harder than others. But I do think that there's so much value in saying, maybe we're not on the same page here, but hey, we both care about kids. Maybe we're just approaching it in a different direction, and I can always respect that.
Yep, that's right. Heather, you want to jump in? I can tell.
Oh, on which part? There's just a lot going on with education right now, and I think it's a critical time. We were discussing earlier that the school board races, there are going to be multiple state school board races that are coming open right now, and so there's a window. I believe it's March. Don't quote me. It's mid-March and to the end of March, where you can go and register at the Lieutenant Governor's office.
Do you mean
if you're interested.
The filing for candidate?
The filing, sorry, yes.
It starts March 15th and closes the 20th.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
That's 5 days.
So it's only 5 days, which is kind of,
days,
which is a little strange too. So I had actually later legislature, if you ever wanted to open up that window, that would be good, because I go out of town quite a bit, and so I mean, it's kind of narrowing the window.
It has to be after electronically.
It has to be after legislation and before caucus night.
Exactly.
And it ends at 5 p.m. the
So it
day
ends
of
up
caucus.
being, March is an interesting month. When they say March Madness for basketball, it's also March Madness for politics, you know. So that window has closed significantly. So, but basically there are some great opportunities to serve on the state school board. It's an interesting process in Utah, and there are even some bills right now at the legislature to change the process of selection, because you go through a committee process. So you actually go and you file with the Lieutenant Governor's office, and then you submit some paperwork about yourself, and then they'll interview you. There's a committee of 12. And they represent different industries. So I know it's not just all industry, but I know like the mining industry actually has a person on the selection committee, kind of, and then there's also real estate, there's a parent, there's a charter school board, There's somebody from district. So you've got different people on that selection committee. They'll interview you. You go through. And then after that, then there's a process where it goes to the governor. And anyway, to make kind of the long story short, if you're interested, make sure you make that 5-day window.
Yeah.
And really, I would just encourage people to just be involved and put your hat in the ring, because you just never know, you could be on the state school board, or it's just always a great experience too.
Yeah.
And anyway, it'll be interesting to see how these bills also do affect us, if any of them do pass.
So tell us,
So there's
tell us
3
about
bills
those bills.
out right now that affect elections of state school board members.
Right.
The first is from Representative Nielsen, and it would just go to direct nonpartisan elections. They would continue to have 4-year staggered terms like they do now.
Right.
Just no committee, right?
Direct,
No
yes.
committee
It eliminates
process.
the recruiting and nominating committee that's currently in code. The second bill also eliminates the recruiting and nominating committee, but it moves it to a partisan process. There hasn't been a lot of appetite amongst the public for a partisan process. These bills have both been run numerous times over the last 5 years, and they've kind of just still, just come to a chicken, game of chicken, and nothing's moved.
Right.
There's a third bill, actually, by Representative Powell that keeps the recruiting and nominating committee. One of the criticisms has been that many of the people that sit on that committee are also registered lobbyists on the Hill. In fact, if you look at the list,
I didn't know that,
yes,
actually.
if you look at the list, quite a few of them are people that all of us here know,
Right.
Because they're up there every day at the legislature, and that committee is
an
made up a
interesting
lot of
conflict.
lobbyists. And so Representative Powell has a bill that says the governor appoints that committee, that no registered lobbyists can be appointed to the committee. So it kind of,
So his bill really just changes the nominating
The
committee, but not
it
the
does. It
process.
does not
The
change
other
the
two
process.
removes the
Yes.
The actual
committee.
process,
Yeah.
right? Right, and I think that's interesting to note. And like I said, I mean, being an incumbent technically right now, it's hard to comment on the process. But I think I understand where the committee came from, but I also do question. I actually think that personally, Representative Craig Powell's bill, I can understand his concern on that, because there's an unelected body choosing nominees for an elected position.
Yes.
And I feel like that's just, it gets the waters murky for an election process, and even constitution, I don't know how that would
and even when you
really
think about accountability,
Right,
if you're a
absolutely.
registered lobbyist or president of an association, who do your loyalties line with? They're not really lying with the voters, they're lying
Right.
with your board or,
And there's not a constituency as much.
Yeah.
I mean, there
Right.
is a constituency, but perhaps it's
Mining.
a pain.
yeah,
and,
that's
yeah.
right. Narrow,
Yeah.
farmers,
Right, right.
So there has been a lot of discussion, I think, over the last 6, 8, 9 months, maybe even longer than that, about how we make educational choices in our state. Certainly there's been talk about Common Core, there's been talk about textbooks, how we
Right.
how we get people on the school board. Do you think because of those conversations that are really looking at how we make educational decisions in our state as a board, do you think those bills will pass? Do you think any of them will? I mean, obviously not all of them can, or there'd be a
Right.
conflict, but.
And I have some concerns with a few of the bills, just me personally. Some of them, it's, one of the things that I think, first of all, that we've tried to do on the state board, I think the State Board of Education is a pretty good makeup of Utah right now. Like there are people with different backgrounds that are on there. I respect all of the members on the State Board of Education. Don't always agree on a lot of things, but
Sure.
oftentimes we do. So you
Right.
just never know.
Right.
But I do feel like right now there are some bills out there right now that are trying to limit a little bit more, like even curriculum. And one of the things that we've really tried hard to do at the state level is to really push down that decision making to the districts
To the
and to the
district level.
local level, to the charter school, whatever it might be. But let them choose their own textbooks. And there's one bill out there right now that I have a few concerns with, where I feel like it limits that. And I don't know if that was the intention. I think that that's what it could do. And so I want to make sure that we preserve that ability for those local, and we call them LEAs,
Sure.
to choose their own textbooks and be able to, choose how they're teaching those standards. And so, we set the standards at the state level. And I've actually compared it recently just to the Olympics. It's kind of like, like in ice skating, you have a triple toe loop and you've got the double Lutz, and, you've got to do the little spinny. I don't know when they grab the ice skate and put it above their head. I can't even imagine how they do that. But we basically put forward the things that need to be accomplished but we're letting the local LEAs choose the
Decide.
process and,
Sure,
and the
how to get there.
creativity
Yeah.
in that. And that's how actually I'm even describing right now, like what we're doing with the standards in Utah, because it is up to the local LEA to then decide that. And so any bill that comes about that restricts that, I really oppose, and I hope that even the legislature can really see that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, I've been going around and talking with principals in my area and just asking them, tell me how you're making decisions here. How are you getting the textbooks? How does this these set of standards, how do they impact you? Are you feeling like the federal government is involved? And so far, universally, they're telling me that they're the ones making the decisions for the textbooks, that they have parent councils who are involved
Yes.
with making decisions on textbooks, and that so far, everyone that I've talked to is opposed to the federal government coming in and saying, this is how we want you to run your school, but they feel like they have the autonomy to make those choices.
Right.
And that they're reading, the books that might potentially be on a reading list and, making sure and getting input from parents and things. So I think it's working in a way that maybe not everybody's aware of, but they're,
Right.
they're feeling like they've got autonomy.
Well, and be on one of those parent committees.
Right.
The curriculum
Oh,
committees.
right.
They have parent
Yeah.
curriculum committees, and people don't realize that. So
Right.
if your child attends a district school, call your district or your charter, wherever they attend, and say, hey, how do I become involved in that? Because really, the books. I mean, we've all read books that maybe we don't like. Like I'm kind of a mathematician, a little bit of my background, and some of the math books, I'm like, oh, I don't like the way that they teach this.
Right.
And it's not that there's anything sinister in it. It's
Sure.
just it's not my preference. But
I'm a Saxon math kind of gal, so
I
I'm
like
happy with
Saxon,
Saxon.
actually.
It's really easy
Right.
for me to teach my kids
Right.
if they need supplement from the school.
Right, but I think it's important for those parents. So parents, even right now, just know that there are
Yeah.
curriculum committees, and
Yeah.
it's not at the state level. It's interesting because sometimes some of those same people that will call me and they think that we're trying to take over education, and dictate process. I've told them no, we are separating it out. We're saying, hey, we're going to tell you the standards. Like I said, kind of the triple toe loops and all of that.
Right.
But overall, we're pushing that down and. Just recently I got a call from somebody who said, we need to start banning these certain books at the state level. And, and it was interesting because I said, now wait a minute.
That makes me
you were
cringe
just,
a
you
little
just
bit.
called
You
me-
want to ban a book?
Right.
I
What?
said, just 3 weeks ago you called me and said that you wanted your district to have more control. And
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. And that's one of the reasons that I really respect our
Right.
board, because really there are times when we step back and we say, is
Yeah.
this limiting
Yeah.
the choice for these LEAs? And
Yeah.
so anyway.
So would an
we preserve
initiative
that.
for laptops and no textbooks change that? Or is
No,
that separate
look,
from-
That's
and that's,
separate.
I think that, but I think that's a fascinating discussion, and I wrote
so,
recently
too.
too on the digital natives, right? And I found this great little picture online of a fetus inside with the cell phone right up to his ear, and we talk about how does education change? I mean, we're still, no offense, but we're still kind of stuck in the 1700s, where you go to a school, you sit down, and you have a book put in front of you, and you can write. So I think putting textbooks online and being able to do things digitally, and as a parent, I have kids at all different levels, and so
Right.
I don't want my
Right.
4th grader reading things that I'm fine with my 12th grader reading, because they
Right.
have a different understanding and they've gone through a number of years and got background, and we've had discussions and stuff, so sometimes the topics are a little bit different. But I wanted to talk really briefly about your guest post that you had recently about
Yes.
testing and
Yes.
looking at test questions, and how do you still maintain the integrity of the test and make sure that nothing sinister is going on, and you
Right.
actually know somebody and had somebody write for your blog
Yes.
who reviewed the test?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, Representative Hughes passed a bill that required a 15-parent basically test question review committee. Our state had decided to come out of SBAC, which was a multi-state thing, and do their own thing as far as testing, because of lots of concerns of parents. So this was kind of part of that push to have parents review. So I contacted a parent that was on that committee. So she spent an entire week here in Salt Lake. She's from Cache Valley, staying in a hotel, spending hours a day reading test questions, looking for lots of different things that could be concerning. And then, so now we have this bill coming out, HB 81, that talks about that any parent could have the right to go down to the State Office of Education, and under certain circumstances, it doesn't say, the test is just free and available.
Right.
They have to check their phone at the door and,
Right.
and those kind of things. But there is a concern, that committee costs taxpayers money, to have 15 parents come do that. And if test questions become compromised, it's not a matter of just writing a new question.
Right.
There's this whole process, and so that becomes concerning that, we want our own test, but then is it ever going to be good enough? Are we ever going to, we have tried to get parents involved.
Well, and we want transparency as much as we can, and yet at the same time, like I serve on the State Records Committee, and one of the things we do is deal with GRAMA appeals, so the Government Records Access Management Act, and people who feel like they should have the ability to look at certain documents, but the reality is there are some that are legally protected, and one of the ones explicitly in statute are test questions. Right. There are some things where you could potentially compromise the integrity of being able to take a test, and maybe not that parent, but maybe their neighbor or any of those things. So
and even verbally, I mean, they could even say something on accident to their child and say, oh, make sure you understand this type of a word problem or whatever it might be. And I come from a research background. I've owned my own company for 15 years with doing research, and it's that's why I would actually strongly oppose that bill, because even though it says there's a $1,000 fine, what people don't realize is we had to spend $39 million writing our own test. And let me tell you, do you want to sign a non-disclosure saying that you would owe $39 million? And while I love that we did own our own test, and that's why we did the parent committee, we even had some of our strongest opponents come and be on that committee, people that had the most concerns. They had to sign strict non-disclosures. But like I said, I would think you don't want to have to rewrite that test.
Are they concerned about the way the questions are written, or about the quality of the
They're not worried about the quality as
They're
much
worried
as
about liberal things
there might
coming
be
out.
Any sort of agenda,
a tone, or that there might be.
The kids will not remember. Like, they're not going to osmosis that on in a test on one maybe. But I'm just not
and the
worried
test
about
is
it.
so broad, right? That the ability to say I'm going to know exactly what questions are going to be on my child's test. Therefore, I mean, and my
we're
husband,
adaptive. We're actually adaptive. And people don't realize what an adaptive test is that if you're doing well on the test, then that's going to take it up to a different level. So that test is never the same. There's millions of possibilities of testing. So that test is not, what people aren't understanding is this isn't like our day when we took the bubble sheet and we said A or E. No, this is a very different
way. That's right. I remember those test preps.
So,
if you don't know, circle C.
Right, that's right. And when in doubt, C. But if you're not getting test questions, then it actually will adapt to your level. And so anyway, it's a more complete picture. And if some people have problems with that assessment piece, but in different pieces. But I think it's important to understand the actual process of what we're doing.
It is, and I think it's worth the discussion to say with that many possibilities, it actually might be okay to have transparency, because there's no way to actually cheat the test. I mean, it would be very difficult, in my opinion, to go in and get enough information that you could quote unquote cheat. And yet at the same time, I mean, your points are very valid that we've spent an incredible amount of money to create Utah's test to Utah's standards, and that we want to be able to preserve that integrity. And yet, I mean, part of the conversation in the computer science world is the best way to encrypt something is you make it public. It's just that you change it very frequently, and you don't have the ability to change the test frequently.
That's the problem. We don't have the money to change the test frequently, so that's why we are going to have to be very cautious in that. And I am all about transparency. If you wanted any other aspect, but when it comes to the actual testing questions, like I said, it just takes one person, which I tell you right now, the statistics are in that favor of at least one person doing something to jeopardize that test.
Because they can bring in pen and paper, according to
and you can check one device at the door and have other devices. It could be in your pen. I mean, whatever.
I think even and even if it's not intentional, they just let something slip in. But I think what we're trying to do right here with this bill, and I've even talked to the representative running with it, and I'll talk to him again. I think we're taking a sledgehammer to cure an anthill. You know, like we're just kind of I don't know what, but we're basically. We need to use something, a fine tool, and there are a few parents concerned, but it's not the vast majority. And I think too often we're thinking that it is the vast majority, and they have valid concerns. But let's meet with them and let's figure out a way to talk with them, and we could give them some of the sample questions that were more public.
Sure.
And so I'm fine with that.
Sure.
But I think we just have to make sure that we've spent a lot of money on that test, and I certainly don't want to keep spending a lot more money on testing when I'd rather that money be getting into the classroom and helping our education system be better.
Sure, and I think that's the bottom line goal for everybody is how do we give top-notch education to as many kids in Utah as possible. That is our job, right? Is
Right.
to make sure as many kids as possible are touched by that. Well, I appreciate you all coming and joining today on Valentine's Day.
It's
and
fun.
yeah, we had a great conversation. The hard part is cutting it off, man, and I wish we could keep going because education is such a big issue, and so is our voting, our ability to vote. So thank you for joining me.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us with On Point.
Thank you.